This is Margaret, and this is Zach, who directed the movie. Zach, Micah wrote it. Did you write it with Micah?
No, Mike wrote the movie. Yeah.
Okay. How does that work? Do you go in and kind of what happens? How did it start? You okay, Margaret?
Yeah, I was looking for a footstool, but there isn't one, so I'm just gonna forfeit it. No, I'm quite happy. No.
We have this.
I'm good. Hi.
Oh yeah, how's everyone doing?
Great.
Is that movie not the best? Seriously, it's not just completely incredible. I think it's one of my favorite. It reminds me of my favorite movies, like The Breakfast Club or Apocalypse Now, where this happens in one place.
Yeah, this is just like The Breakfast Club.
It
Apocalypse
is.
Now.
No, it really is. And, I'll actually direct this question to Zach, because Margaret isn't hip to it, I guess. But the idea that things like Apocalypse Now, I feel like it happens on the boat. Right, the movie happens there. Breakfast Club, it happens in that room. And so, what's the challenge is first Zach and then Margaret, or either way, with making a movie that happens in one space. Do you disagree with Apocalypse Now?
You know, it's funny. I just rewatched it like a month ago.
The whole thing is just the boat.
They're on the boat for the majority of it. I mean, you get a lot of different landscapes. I always think of it as being so deep inside his own head. But as far as the distinct challenges of making something in one location, for me, the first challenge that I was thinking about was the challenge of trying to make it work as a movie, like to work as cinema. Because sometimes you see films that are set in one location and they feel a little bit like filmed plays, and I very much wanted to avoid that. I wanted it to feel like it was going with the grain of the medium, like it had to be a movie. But when you're confined in terms of the locations and you've got these two characters that you're with for the whole time, you have to try to find ways that are inventive to make it feel like cinema, but inventive, but not in a way that's like taking away from the performances. You always want to be supporting the performances with your cinematic flourishes, if I may be so bold.
Margaret, what was your favorite part and least favorite part of being in such a confined space? Start with favorite, please.
Okay. My favorite part of being in a confined space. I mean,
in the context of the film.
In the context of the film.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like sometimes the more boundaries that you're given, oddly, the more freedom comes, in the sense that everything was very. I learned this film front to back, word perfect, and then on top of that, which I don't always do, but in this instance I did. Every everything was exactly as it was on the page, and then Zach blocked everything to a T, and we made this film in 18 days, so we didn't have time to have coverage from this angle and that angle and close and wide and whatever. It was just whatever he edited before we shot it, essentially. I mean, he was choosing the takes afterwards, but every single frame was pre-set up, and we knew I was gonna walk here and turn here, and it was all incredibly specific. And so weirdly, having all of these rules in place gives you more freedom, because once it's in your body and you know exactly what you're saying and exactly what you're doing, it's well, I guess if I'm going to be saying this and doing this and walking from point A to point B, then there's actually turns out a million ways for me to do that one thing. So my favorite part was that.
And that's also the challenging part, no?
I guess.
Maybe, well,
yeah.
I should be asking what the least favorite part is. Let's go past it, because I like that.
Okay.
You know what I always think about when I watch movies and I'll make them? What's a scene in this movie that you barely got through, where something fucked up happened? It was you almost what's the moment? Was there any moment that was really hard to make?
From a technical perspective, I'm trying to think if there's.
Oh, I know the technical perspective one.
Oh,
you did that crazy camera movement where I'm tackled and I lose the phone. That was hard.
Yeah, so the scene where Chris goes for the phone, and Margaret's holding the phone, and then the phone falls to the floor.
Yeah.
So what's in the film is it starts as this sort of like overhead-ish shot as they're going for the phone, and then it cuts to an inverted shot with them already on the floor. And we were trying to get that all in one movement. So it started sort of like this, and then the idea was going to be that as they went to the floor, the camera went like this, and it wound up naturally inverted, not choosing to invert, but it inverted naturally because it was following them the whole time. But it was super complicated. It was like a remote head and the wheels,
Kind of like the only complicated part of the filming, in the sense that like everything else was pretty straightforward.
That was probably the trickiest shot that was in the film, yeah. And so there was this cut in the middle of it as a result.
Have you, either of you, thought about doing something like this again, but a totally different story? Like, would you make another movie with Chris and Margaret? And would you do another movie? Because when I watched this movie, my first thought
I think
was...
this is Jack playing agent.
I just thought that there's more meat on the bone.
I'd make a movie with Chris and Margaret right now.
Okay, great.
My other thought was that...
But hopefully more than one location. Let's do like 2 locations.
Okay,
great.
Maybe this is contrary, it's interesting that you said that you dislike when something feels like a play being filmed. Because after I saw this, and I love this movie more than anything, I was also, which I told you this, and it didn't seem to
Land.
land
I was the
anywhere.
only person that was on board with that.
I think that they should do a run on Broadway also.
I
Do
agree.
you guys not feel that? Some people, I really just think, and I'm not making it.
To be clear, I think that could be awesome.
He just
it's
designed
not my,
the
it's not,
Yeah.
it's just not my.
So you're out.
I don't know I don't know anything about theater. I'm like, I'm the last person that someone wants to direct a play. I don't really know anything about the craft of theater. I like watching plays, but I feel like it's a whole other language, I would imagine.
I have a question about, so you guys made the movie in 18 days, which seems insane to me. Like, I don't know how it's possible. So, was there like every day, I assume, like, because that amount of time is so finite, was there a version of this movie that would have had more or less? I guess it's more of a Zach question. Or was it always, like, is there any elasticity in the story when you were making it because it was so confined?
You know what the wild thing is? I was thinking about this the other day. The amount of setups that we shot that didn't make it into the movie, talking about the pre-visualization, the amount of setups that we shot that didn't make it into the film is 2. There were only 2 setups that didn't make it in. So yeah, it was like we wanted to get the most out of these 18 days, and so there was a lot of pre-visualization work done in this program called Cinetracer, which is like a computer, it's sort of like a video game that you can do your shots in. But the other thing that I think meant that we had to move or be kind of judicious with our shot selection was that we shot in sequence. It was basically shot from beginning to end, more or
Which
less.
is
So
so
is that better for you?
fabulous. Yeah, it's
Okay.
so great, especially with this where it's like the whole movie just kind of rides on like how the 2 people are feeling throughout the whole movie. It's just a relationship movie, and so like each beat is dependent upon the last beat, like second for second, and so if you're able to have the gift of like knowing how you felt the last second, it makes a lot more sense for the next one.
Yeah, I don't know how you people do that out of order. It's really crazy.
Well, I
I
think
understand
that's
it's a
when
budget
like
issue.
directors a lot of times like shoot it, it's with the like option to edit it how they want.
Yeah.
You've got like 10 different takes with 3 different setups, and you've got like this emotional version, and this unemotional version, and this funny version, and this sad version, whatever. And then you're just kind of like going into the editing room, and that's where the movie's made. And so in
It
this
must make your
version,
job so much less fun.
it is less fun.
Yeah.
In this version, it's like
That
I
must
have
make you
all
feel
the
more
control.
like a technician. Like you're just
Totally.
delivering all these things.
Totally.
And you guys were saying in the last Q&A, that like max you would do 3 takes of it.
So we do like 3 to 5.
That
Maybe
feels
six.
small, right?
On average, yeah. There
Okay.
were a couple where we went a little more than that, but yeah, I
Right.
think probably like maybe 5.
A couple were a bit more, a couple were a bit less.
Yeah,
And
I think
you-
5 was probably right in the middle. Yeah.
So I remember you guys went to Chris's apartment and he made bread.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
pasta.
right. You did. It's really good.
I wasn't there, but I heard about it, and you ran through
And
it.
then we went to my apartment and I didn't make bread.
That's true. Rude. So, was there that chemistry right away? Like, so from a director's point of view, you were like, oh, got it, Chris and Margaret would be perfect, or was there a lot to like figure out?
No, I think it was there right from the start. I think it's always interesting how when you're casting actors who are going to be opposite one another, it's a little bit like a science equation. Well, like a chemistry equation, right? Where it's like you want actors with different like affects, like different screen affects, because sometimes I think about actors as like musical instruments, and you don't want two actors who play the same instrument.
What is Chris?
I think he's sometimes like
You
like
made
an
this whole
upright.
metaphor for you, Jack.
I'm sorry.
I just made this whole metaphor for you, Jack.
True. No, I think he's maybe like an upright bass.
Oh,
There's
cool.
something
Yeah.
very heavy about his performance.
He's super rooted.
He's exactly right.
Yeah.
He's super rooted.
And he doesn't make big motions.
That's exactly right. Like it's funny. At one point, I was
Margaret's
talking.
like a slinky.
At one point the rooted thing is so true. At one point I was talking to him and I was like, it's almost like the two of you are playing this tennis match and Margaret is like running all over her side of the tennis court. Like, get this shot, get that shot. She's running all over. And then Chris, you're on the other side of the court and you're just kind of rooted and you're not moving and you're sending her all over the place and you're doing the very best that you can to stand totally still. So you want those like opposite energies. That's what I think makes chemistry interesting. You don't want the actors to have like the same instrument. Yeah.
What do you think? So you were friends with Chris,
Yeah.
and you always wanted to work with him.
Yeah, I think he's great.
And then, so what happened? How did Chris get in the? How did you meet Zach?
I read the script, loved the script,
Got it.
and had a meeting with Zach right after I'd gotten the COVID vaccine, and I could barely open my eyes. But I was like, I promise on another day they open like 2 times this size.
And it was a great meeting besides that?
It was a great meeting besides that.
Okay.
Took my word for it.
And then, did you guys talk about Chris, or was that, like, how did that happen?
It came up.
Yeah.
It came
Yeah,
up.
it came up because we were talking about actors for Hal.
I think Chris was his first option, and I was like, yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and I wanted to work with Chris for a number of years, and he's just been in so many great films, so many great performances. So we sent the script along to him, and he read it very quickly. And yeah, it was maybe like a week later, 10 days after I met with you, that I sat down with Chris. So the whole thing came together quite quickly, the production.
How do you want people to feel in the end?
Like, damn, that was the best movie I ever saw in my whole life. Wow.
Cool. Sorry. Cool. You agree with that, Zach? I don't mean artistically, but it's like what Margaret said. How do you want? I think the ending is. One of my favorite parts. I love the whole film, but I think the end is super subversive because I think it feels like you're on this ride to go to a much darker place, and I didn't realize how unexpected. I thought the end was sweet. I know there's different ways to take it. I didn't realize how unexpected that was until it happened. And so I was just wondering if you felt that way, if you felt that it was odd. I think it's odd and more interesting than like a death, to Andy's point on the last Q&A.
Well, I'm always a little bit wary to discuss the meaning of an ending or the meaning of any aspect of.
Why? Because you're afraid that it then colors it for people?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you discuss it with people who have already seen the movie or no?
Would I?
Yeah.
Would I?
I have an answer. I'll give you a serious answer.
Yeah, no.
I think like cynicism is boring.
I agree.
And like having it like be like almost perfect, but then like no, it's kind of like boring. Like what if it just like were perfect and we were all just like happy? Like that's like so much like harder and riskier and kind of like awesome if you can
Totally.
pull it off. And I think he does. I think he pulls it
That's
off.
why I think it's so strange. I think it's so culturally, like, it would be so much more like in this time period if it just like devolved into hell.
Totally. It's like irony is the safest place to be operating from, but if you're leading from your heart, like you're certainly like at risk of being completely pummeled. But if you do pull it off, then it's extraordinary.
Yeah, like I think the movie is, so I wonder if this would, I think the movie is like a beautiful love story.
I agree.
And I think that, do you guys disagree with that? Some people are laughing. Some, I don't know. It's just how I took it. I took it as like, when I got to the end, I was so surprised at how I felt, which was really like hopeful. I guess, is that intentional?
Well,
Or do you not want to
tough.
speak to it?
It's tough. I don't mean to be like coy.
No, I don't.
It's just that I sort of feel like sometimes I think one of the most beautiful things about art is that it can have so many different meanings, and people can walk away from the same work of art with so many different interpretations. And I kind of feel like if someone reads that the director said X about a movie,
Sure.
some folks are going to be like, screw him, who cares what he thinks, I know what I think, and that's totally cool. But then other people might be like, oh, that's what it means, and then they stop thinking about it, and that's what I would want to try to avoid. So.
And you always wanted to make a movie about dominatrix, I heard?
For a number of years, yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Well,
Do you want to talk about that?
I think that paradoxes tend to be at the heart of a lot of really good movies. I don't know why, but there seems to be something about the way movie structure tends to work and like paradoxical ideas that you see it come up over and over and over again. And I was like, oh, dominatrix, that's a good paradox because she has all the power over her client inside the role play, but outside the role play, she has none of the power over her client. The client is the boss. And I was like, oh, if you could construct something where you pit those two things against one another, you start to get to a really interesting place. When you start to, you have the paradox is like these two extreme positions, and then when they start to bleed together and it gets like muddy, right? And the poles starts like vacillating between the poles, and you don't know where the truth is. That's where I think thrillers, psychological thrillers, start to become really interesting.
How do you feel about that, Margaret? Good.
So true. Yeah. Let me tell you, yeah.
What's the time frame of this type of thing? 5 minutes? How do you guys feel?
Should we take questions from the audience?
I actually do want to take some questions, but we're just.
I feel like Sam Lerner's like
Where's Sam?
begging for a question.
Oh, hi, Sam. What's the fucking question, Sam?
I don't have one.
Okay, forget it. Do you have a question?
I don't.
Okay.
Brett?
So one thing I want to touch on is okay, how do you shoot something? And we talked about this in the last Q&A, which I saw. But
Jack's out of questions.
Fresh out, but they weren't there. But it's actually really interesting.
Okay.
How do you shoot something that's in one place and not make it redundant?
Oh, you mean in terms of blocking and content?
Yeah,
I mean,
because I did notice that about the movie. I didn't feel ever bored and like I'd seen everything before, especially when they get to the bed projects you hadn't seen. It just felt large in space.
well, I think in a movie, every time you have a new shot, your brain is like, oh, something new is happening. What's this? Like every time there's a new shot, there's neurons in your brain that are getting fired up that have never been fired up before. And they're like, what does this mean, right? Like that's I think part of the experience of watching a movie is there's a frame, there's a composition, or there's a blocking movement. And if it's new, if the brain hasn't seen it before, in this movie so far, and ideally in many other movies, then the audience member is doing some work to try to figure out what's happening and what the significance of these visuals are. So in terms of in terms of making it feel like fresh and not redundant, my intention was to make sure that the film didn't repeat any blocking positions, so that the actors are never standing in the same position like 8 minutes in that they're in like 50 minutes later, for example. So we had 1,200 square feet to work with, which it wasn't a lot, but it also wasn't nothing. It was enough. And then beyond the blocking, there's also the question of composition. So you want to make sure that you're not repeating frames, and also I didn't want to get into many like shot counter shot situations. So for me, movies are visually stimulating when you're getting new images, and the challenge of trying to find new frames, new compositions. That was my sort of personal kind of craft challenge.
Mark, can you describe that as a director? What's it like? Because we don't get to see that part.
Okay. It's like, hey, how's it going?
So that's like when we get there, or that's when we're in the shot?
That's when we get there. And then, no, Zach as a director is somebody that's like incredibly open to what you're gonna give, really collaborative. It's like, honestly, kind of the best case scenario because it's set up for you to win. He knows what he wants, but as long as you're like abiding by the rules, any interpretation of the rules goes, and that kind of fits for the movie. So it's like, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but it was all incredibly choreographed. It was all very specific. All the dialogue is very demanding, and everything is written to kind of a crescendo. And so long as you're kind of like following, it's like a paint by numbers. It's like if you're painting by the numbers, you can do whatever you want within that set of rules. And Zach's like really encouraging and excited and loves what he does. And I think that the most rewarding thing is to work with. I love what I do. Like I love acting and I love making movies in particular. And when you're working with somebody who loves doing what you're doing as much as you do and cares as much as you do, it's the best feeling in the world because you feel safe, because you feel like you're in good hands because their life depends on it. And that's Zach.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, you do, Margaret, Zach, what was it, working with Margaret?
You know, it's funny because actually it's
The best experience of his whole life.
But it's that same thing where, you know, Margaret wants to be, if it's okay for me to say this, the vibe that I get is you want to be the best. You want to be doing your job at the highest level that you can do it at. And it's sort of like what you were saying, it's like that's what you want in a collaborator. You want someone who is there for the right reasons and they are just trying to figure out like, how can I do this at the highest level that it can be done? And Margaret is laser focused. And then the other thing that's fascinating about watching Margaret work is, I was saying this to Annie back there.
Yeah, tell everyone.
No, you have, you talked about acting once as almost feeling like you're surfing the waves of the emotion.
Did I?
She said that?
Carry on.
Y'all like physical comedy?
But I feel like that's...
Margaret, you just said it, did you? Zach, you said that. Was it Riley Keough?
Maybe I...
I'm just kidding.
No,
Was it Margaret?
I'm sure I've said it.
and you can
Well, you hope she said it.
You can see how present she is when you're in the scenes, when you're looking at what she's doing in the monitor. There's a level of presence and focus that I think enables Margaret to jump from affect to affect to affect in a way that it's just very uncommon. There's a lot of work that she does in this film where she is angry one second, then she's playful another second, then she's vulnerable, and it's all happening very quickly. She's like shuttling between these emotions with a lot of speed. And to me, when I try to make sense of it, the only way I can understand that is that you're just so like present in the scene, like intuitive, like thinking brain is off, like just feeling the scene. That's what I'm surmising as I'm watching the monitor. And it's like, I think that's what makes watching Margaret so exciting is it's totally unpredictable what she's gonna do next, but you also it passes the bullshit detector. Like you know that it's for real, you buy it. But it's so unexpected. And I think that's just because of the level of like, kind of like meditative focus or presence that you're bringing to it, so.
Thanks, Zach. Love you, Zach.
They gave a thumbs up. But the last thing I would want to ask is the only people, and so outside of Margaret and Chris, there's people in the elevator, right?
Correct.
How precious were you about that? Because I thought it was, I was obviously like blown away by the presence of anyone else. So just really quickly, the last question, what was the process of that?
Well, so you were asking earlier about trying to make the movie feel like not redundant, right? So it's like you make a list of your bag of tricks, and you're like, what can I do? Like, she can spike the camera in this scene. We can invert. You always have to make it go with the flow.
Yeah.
But it's like, what if there were two people at some point? And why might that happen? Oh, maybe they're talking about something sensitive. That would be the right moment for that to happen. So you're sort of like, you have your like visual like toolkit of tricks, right? And you have to parse it out. You can't like give everybody like all the dessert right at the beginning. You have to like parse the treats out over the course of the movie. And I'm so glad that spoke to you. It's the first time anyone thought that.
I thought about you when I saw that because I imagine if I was you, I would have really labored over the casting.
Yeah.
Because it's like the one opportunity outside of your two leads.
You only got one shot.
And did you, or were you just like, this is 3 people?
No, there was an idea behind the casting.
Can you tell us?
Yeah.
Or do you not want to?
No, I guess it's okay to say. My thought for the casting was to get older actors who what I was hoping for was that they could bear some resemblance, some passing resemblance to to Margaret and Chris.
I
Just
never
like-
knew that. I love
Wow.
that. That's so
just like different
sweet.
stage, you know, visual idea, different stage.
You didn't know that, Margaret?
I didn't, but now that I think about it, that old woman is hot.
Did anyone know that, or was that in your head? Like, was that part of the?
I think Chris asked about it actually.
Oh, Chris did, and Margaret didn't?
I didn't.
So Margaret was busy talking about surfing. Acting, or
I was
whatever.
talking about surfing.
Margaret was doing physical comedy rules. But it's really interesting. I'm really glad I squeezed that one in right before the buzzer. Thank you guys for
Thanks
being
for
here.
coming.
Yeah.